The UFC returns to Perth, Western Australia for the first time since UFC 305 last year, and it is going to be main evented with a big-time fight in the light heavyweight division between the Blackjack Carlos Ulberg and the Devastator Dominick Reyes, and what could very well be a #1 contendership fight for this weight class. And I say that because it's happening just 7 days prior to when the championship will be getting defended at UFC 320 in the main event. The rematch will be going down between the champion Magomed Ankalaev and the former champion Alex Poatan Pereira. So with these two surging light heavyweights, Ulberg and Reyes, clashing together here in Perth, a big-time victory in convincing fashion could put them in the driver's seat for getting the winner of that championship bout next week. Anzac's own Carlos Ulberg will be riding an 8-fight win streak heading into his very first UFC main event this weekend against Reyes, with the last two victories being the most meaningful for sure in his career. Decision wins over former title challenger Volkan Oezdemir and a decision win over former champion Jan Blachowicz. That one came back in March at UFC London. And over the course of this 8-fight win streak, 5 of those 8 have been by way of finish, all happening consecutively between June of 2022 and May of 2024. And as a matter of fact, the last loss for Carlos Ulberg was the only loss of his entire career, and that was in his UFC debut back in March of 2021, where he would be knocked out by Kennedy Nzechukwu. He is a 2020 Dana White Contender Series alum and has all of the tools to potentially be a champion in this weight class, and at 34 years old, he is right in his prime, specifically for light heavyweight, and he has finished 8 of his 12 professional wins, with 7 of those 8 by way of knockout. He's a very technical, precise kickboxer out of the City Kickboxing Gym in New Zealand, and I feel like if he can rally off a 9th consecutive victory, he becomes undeniable for a championship fight in my opinion, especially if he finds a way to finish Dominick Reyes, another former title challenger. And while Reyes isn't necessarily on an 8-fight win streak like his counterpart Ulberg, he is on a 3-fight win streak, all of them by way of knockout, with 2 of them in the first round and 1 in the second round, and all against ranked opponents at the time in which he fought them. The first was Dustin Jacoby, and maybe if he wasn't in the top 15, he was right on the outside looking in, but you get the point. Then Reyes would follow that up with a knockout over former title challenger Anthony Smith, and most recently, back in April at UFC 314, he would finish the longtime veteran and perennial top 10 light heavyweight Nikita Krylov. All in all, Dominick Reyes holds a record of 15-4 with 12 of his 15 wins by way of stoppage, with 10 of the 12 by knockout. So it seems very possible that the victor in this fight could have a big-time knockout performance, because 3 of Dominick Reyes' losses have been by way of knockout, and all 4 of those losses came consecutively in a row between February of 2020 and November of 2022, and we know what kicked off that losing streak. It was the championship fight against John Bones Jones at UFC 247, where many people, including myself and former co-host of the show Noah, believe that Dominick Reyes should have not only beaten John Jones that night, but become the new light heavyweight champion of the world. But instead, he would lose a razor-thin unanimous decision on the scorecards, and that would send him on a spiral downwind. Following up that loss to John Jones with 3 back-to-back-to-back knockout losses against Jan Blachowicz, Jiri Prochazka, and Ryan Spann. But after a 1.5 year long hiatus between November of 2022 and June of 2024, that is when the career resurgence of Dominick Reyes began with that aforementioned knockout win over Dustin Jacoby, and it has been quite the comeback story for Dom. Dare I say fairy tale-esque, and if he can find a way to tally off his 4th consecutive win over someone as surging and that holds as high a ceiling as Carlos Ulberg, it will absolutely catapult him right back to where he once was in the light heavyweight title discussion, dare I say, the #1 contender. Now, of course, I do realize that on that card next week at UFC 320, we are seeing what is also a potential #1 contendership bout in the very same weight class. That is between former champion Jiri Prochazka and former title challenger Khalil Roundtree Jr. So it may just come down to who can put together the most convincing / dominant performance between these 4 fighters, Carlos Ulberg and Dominick Reyes in the UFC Perth main event this weekend, and Jiri Prochazka and Khalil Roundtree Jr. next weekend in the featured bout at UFC 320. And I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility that if Alex Pereira can regain his light heavyweight throne, he would be one apiece with Magomed Ankalaev, and you could maybe argue that they should have a trilogy bout, but I just have a feeling that the UFC doesn't want to go that route. I would love to hear your thoughts on this fight down in the comments below, alongside with your predictions in what is more than likely to deliver as a 25-minute or less kickboxing affair, with either Reyes or Ulberg potentially getting put down on the canvas and the other standing tall in the octagon in Perth. And be sure to also let me know if you think this will be a number one contendership bout, or if you agree with me in the sentiment of it may just come down to who can put together the most convincing performance between this fight and the featured bout next weekend. And while this weekend's card in Perth features 14 fights, at least at the day I'm recording this, there aren't a ton of other huge names or storylines that I want to get into. However, there is another ranked bout on the card I want to touch on and then give some shine on what I feel could be some very fun potential bouts. The other ranked matchup is in the UFC strawweight division, as we will see the 14th ranked 115 pounder in the world, Loma Lookboonmee, taking on the surging newcomer to the UFC, Alexia Tainara. Loma will enter this fight having won 6 of her last 7 bouts, including her last 4 in a row, and the victory that launched her into the rankings most recently was back in April, as she would get a decision win over Estela Nunes, and before that it was wins over Bruna Brazil, Elise Reed, and Denise Gomes. And as a matter of fact, since debuting back in October of 2019, Loma actually holds a record of 7-2 in the UFC, and the only 2 losses she has is to the longtime OG Angela Hill, who is still in the rankings, and the other was her last loss that came in November of 2021 against Lupi Godinez, who now sits at number 6 in the world and potentially is 1 win away from title contention. And while Loma has only finished 2 of her 10 professional wins, she is a very elite and precise Muay Thai practitioner and presents a lot of problems for these ladies in this division on the feet. As for her opponent, Alexia Tainara, it is the complete opposite in terms of skill set and X's and O's, as she has finished 8 of her 12 professional wins by submission. She is just 27 years of age and made a splash in her UFC debut back in March at UFC London against the meatball Molly McCann, where not only would she get the victory, but she would dominate en route to getting a submission late in the first round. She is a 2024 Dana White Contender Series alum and has not lost a bout since November of 2019 in what is still her only professional loss to date, and that was against Bruna Brazil on the Brazilian regional circuit, meaning that Tainara enters this fight against Loma Lookboonmee riding a 10-fight win streak. In what will just be her second UFC bout, she has an opportunity to crash into the top 15 of the 115-pound division. Former top 15 light heavyweight Jimmy Crute will look to continue his momentum that he restarted back in July of this year, where he would submit Marcin Prokhnio in the first round of their bout, in what was the first victory for Jimmy Crute since October of 2020, meaning that he was on a 5-fight winless streak heading into that UFC 318 bout with 3 losses due to stoppage and 2 draws. But at just 29 years of age, Jimmy Crute still has the opportunity to put together a run in this light heavyweight division and reinsert himself into the top 15, and considering that Jimmy still has a very dangerous finishing rate, having won 10 of his 13 by way of stoppage, he has an opportunity to get a second victory in a row over the 0-2 in the UFC Ivan Ursulan, who is potentially fighting for his job. The Celtic kid and Australia's own Jake Matthews is back, taking on the longtime veteran Neil Magny this weekend, and Jake Matthews is arguably riding the hottest stretch of his long UFC career thus far, having won 4 of his last 5 bouts, including 3 in a row, none bigger than a submission win over Chidi Njokuani in July. However, it's important to note that Neil Magny is entering this fight after a big bounce-back win just a little over a month and a half ago on August 2nd, where he would finish Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos via TKO. And that came on the heels of a 2-fight first-round knockout losing streak to Carlos Prades and Michael Morales. And somehow Jake Matthews is just 31 years of age, even though he's been in the UFC since June of 2014. It's been a long time coming for him to truly cement himself as a legitimate player in this welterweight division, and I feel that if he gets a win over the veteran Neil Magny this weekend, he will get that opportunity to get into the top 15. Another notable city kickboxing fighter on this card is the undefeated 7-0 Navajo Sterling, looking to continue his win streak in the UFC since joining last year. So far, he has 2 back-to-back unanimous decision wins since getting a knockout victory on the 2024 season of the Contender Series, and he's now looking for his first big stamp performance in the company. But it may not come easy because he is taking on the 12-2 Rodolfo Bellato. However, it is worth noting that both of Bellato's professional losses have been by way of knockout, and that's something that Sterling should be able to pinpoint on if I had to guess. And I also want to mention one last fight buried on the prelims, and that is the undefeated UFC newcomer Michelle Montague, who is a training partner of Kayla Harrison down in American Top Team and has finished all 6 of her professional wins by way of submission, taking on the veteran Luana Carolina. Michelle is a 5-fight Professional Fighters League veteran and is now making the jump to the UFC at just 31 years of age, so right in her prime, and has an opportunity to get a pretty relevant win already in her debut against someone like Luana, who doesn't have the prettiest of records sitting at 11-4, but is riding a 3-fight win streak heading into this bout, and even has notable victories over Priscilla Cachoeira and Lupi Godinez. So that is it for the UFC Perth card, and I want to get your thoughts, your predictions, and your bets down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we are on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and the goal is to hit that before the end of the year. Alongside with weekly breakdowns of the biggest and best fights and storylines heading into each card, in the aftermath I also recap the most meaningful results, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes are released there. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you all in the next video.